Okay, I think we're situated. I hope you guys are able to hear me okay. If you could go ahead and let me know that you see that I'm going live. In the comments, just say hi, something like that. That would be super, super helpful. I apologize, you guys, that we're late coming live tonight. Ooh, I see that someone hopped on. That's a good sign. It has just been a little mayhem of technical issues for whatever reason. But we're rolling with the punches. Yay, Andrea. Oh my gosh, that's so good. I'm glad that we have it all sorted out. I have my iPad propped up with my computer on the side, and it's usually flip-flopped around. But, you know, technology happens, and we had 4 weeks of no technology hiccups. So we were bound for one, but I appreciate your guys' flexibility. Good to see you, Cassidy. Thanks for joining us. So anyway, I'm gonna hopefully wait for a couple people to pop on. Just as a reminder, if you have never heard of the San Dieguito River Valley Conservancy, I can let you know a little bit about our mission and what we do and what we focus on, and especially how we're adapting to the current circumstances. And just as a little debrief or PSA, I do have a dog, so she is hopefully going to be calmly resting next to me during our discussion, but if you hear any little excited pitter-patter, that's just my dog trying to say hello. So with that, my name is Anna Lutz-Johnson. I am the education manager for the San Dieguito River Valley Conservancy. And the San Dieguito River Valley Conservancy is looks like you guys are having a little trouble with the noise or hearing me. Len, is that better? Let's try to make it a little closer. Let me know in the comments if you can hear me better. Okay. So the Conservancy is in a 501c3 nonprofit, and we focus on the San Dieguito watershed. And our 3 main pillars of focus are recreation, education, and conservation. So we're doing lots of programs that are centered around land acquisition and then restoring those lands into a native landscape that is going to hopefully support the species that we want to bring back into that area. Hey. Okay, that was my dog drinking water. It's just one of those days, friends. Okay, so I'm just gonna hold it a little bit closer. Hopefully that will improve some of the audio quality. We're just gonna get real up close and personal with me though. So as I was saying, we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we've been really adapting our programs to doing things more online while the social distancing is in place. And the past 4 weeks, we were doing Facebook Lives, and you guys had such a great response, and we really appreciate you tuning in and giving a lot of feedback. So we wanted to do 4 more weeks of that. So that being said, we have 4 more weeks. Today's topic is going to be all about birds, and then we have 3 more weeks. Thanks, Len, I appreciate the feedback. We have 3 more weeks after that with watersheds and water quality. And then we are going to be talking about native and invasive plants. And then to end it off, and hopefully if it's safe by then, we'll be able to go hiking. We're going to do like a little beginner's guide to hiking. So that being said, let's jump right into today's topic. So we're going to be talking about different birds found within the San Dieguito River Valley, River Valley watershed. So if you're not familiar again with the location, it runs from the Julian area all the way down to Del Mar and passes through Escondido, with obviously other places in between. So there's a lot of diversity in this area, and that's something that we're going to be covering in 2 weeks from now, I believe. Yes, in 2 weeks from now, we're going to be talking about diversity and biodiversity, and but to lightly hit on it, San Diego is a part of the California Floristic Province, which is considered a biodiversity hotspot. So what that means, biodiversity, if going way back, bio meaning life, and diversity is that there's just a lot of diversity of life, and it's clustered and condensed into these smaller areas. So with that being said, we have a lot of biodiversity, like I said, in San Diego, and that's especially seen within our birds and the different habitats that we have and plant species. So we're going to be focusing on a couple different birds. I am by no means an expert, but it is one of my favorite things to do when we go out in the field. I love looking at all the different bird species and how they're specially adapted to the environment that they're living in. So I want you guys to think back. For the first session, we were talking about pollinators, and we were talking about their special adaptations, and I mentioned butterflies and bats and things like that. But hummingbirds specifically, they have these really long, skinny, extended beaks that are specially designed to be able to reach into more narrow spaces in flowers in order for them to drink up that nectar, get that fluid, get that energy so they can fly from place to place to place. So that's just a really quick example of bird adaptation in order to be able to be sustained in what they're feeding. So we have all of this discussion mentioning birds, like why are they important? Who wants to tell me why they think birds are important? And there's always a little bit of a delay with this. And you guys obviously have to have time to take comments. But I'm gonna go over a little bit of why birds are important. Of course, they're important because they have intrinsic value, meaning they just have value in being themselves. And that's something that we definitely like to highlight in the Conservancy and the programs that we do, is that some of the things that we value, of course, can't be explained always. Andrea, they're insect eaters, they're pollinators, and they also sing beautiful music. Absolutely, yeah. So birds are an integral part of the environment, that they serve as pollinators, as pest control. They do eat rodents, very good. But what I want to touch on today is that they are an indicator species. Or I guess I should say like an indicator, like type of species. So birds are indicators of their environment. And it was really interesting being able to do a lot of this research and learning more and more about them and what it means to be an indicator species. And if I'm looking over here, I have a couple notes to keep me on track. But indicator species, they are there to serve as like almost like a test strip, that there's almost like this, they can tell the temperature of the health of the environment. You know, they have their thumb on the pulse of the environment. So they're really, really sensitive to environmental changes, and they can offer warning signs when something is out of balance or potentially harmful and or dangerous. So that's a really important thing that birds do as an indicator species. And they also respond to change in very predictable ways. When there's change in seasons and in cycles and things like that, their behavior is predictable. And when it's outside of that range, that is an indication that there might be something wrong with the environment or habitat that they are currently in. And then another thing is, this was kind of like an interesting point, but almost like an obvious point when I was learning about this, is that it's very easy to gather and, well, not very easy, but relatively easy to gather and interpret data around birds so you can make informed policy decisions. And something about birds is that they're relatively predictable where they're going to be, easy to count individuals, and also most of their activities in early morning and day and then dusk, not a lot of like overnight nocturnal activity. So for our scientists that are going out into the field, that makes it a lot easier for them to go and track these different species. And so they're predictable, they respond quickly to environmental change, and it's very obvious when it's outside of their typical behavior. So with that being said, there are two really big things that I want to highlight that they can indicate as an indicator species. and that is habitat quality. And there's a couple different things that go in line with habitat quality. So, for example, if there are birds on the shoreline, that they exist primarily on the shoreline and that's their food source, but the habitat quality is poor, meaning that maybe they don't have as much prey availability, then they will no longer live there. So that's an indicator that might be an issue with that habitat specifically. And then also an indicator of habitat quality is the presence of nests. So that's very, very good. You want to be able to see if these species are creating nests and laying clutches and having successful fledglings leave the nest. Then that's a really, really good indicator that there are enough resources available, enough space, clean water if they use it, and then the food that they're eating. So that is all a really good indicator of habitat health. And another one is pollution. Has anybody ever read Rachel Carson's or heard of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring? You can give me a yes, a thumbs up, a smiley face emoji. Have you ever heard of Rachel Carson or Silent Spring? So Rachel Carson is someone that I heard about pretty frequently growing up, and even more so when I entered college at Cal State University, San Marcos, and we were learning about birds as indicator species, and a really good example of that is the DDT pesticide that was used in the early through the mid 20th century, and it's now known that this pesticide DDT is really, really harmful not only to the environment but to people in these mass quantities that it was being used. So Rachel Carson was pretty much the whistleblower, for lack of a better term, in writing Silent Spring. That over time these springs were starting to be eerie. They were very quiet. That in the very early morning you wouldn't be hearing birds anymore. And this is an excellent example of how birds can act as an indicator species. And they were responding very quickly to the harmful effects of these pesticides. So that was really interesting. Another interesting thing for me to learn. Love you guys that are chiming in. Also, yes, absolutely, Len, is that the DDT made eggshells really brittle, so they were unsuccessful in restoring their populations. So that was really, really, really dangerous. But on a happier note, we can divert a little bit to it's nesting season right now. I was kind of going over what are these different topics that we can learn about together and discuss together, and I was like, well, it's nesting season, so this is a perfect time to talk about the different birds that you can see are laying their clutches and they're hatching and the fledglings are leaving the nest. I hope you guys have been able to keep up with the burrowing owl nests that we talked about last week through the live cam in San Diego Zoo. They have grown. I swear they've doubled in size. It's amazing. So anyway, nesting season. So California Fish and Wildlife indicates, and we follow this in our restoration projects as well, that nesting season is between mid-January to mid-September, with most species creating their nests and laying their eggs from March to August. So what that means, this nesting season, is that there are different protocols that need to be followed that will possibly limit work or limit where we're allowed to go, so we can give these birds the space that they need in order to raise their chicks and hopefully have them leave the nest. So that, following up with that question is, have you been hearing or seeing any evidence of nests in your neighborhood? Or maybe, where you're walking or going to? Have you been hearing, have you been hearing or seeing any evidence of nests in your neighborhood? I'm really curious. So I live in Escondido, And I usually see a good amount of raptors out and about. I live about 10 or 15 minutes away from Lake Hodges. That's actually really convenient for me. But there is a red-tailed hawk nest a couple hundred feet away from my house, and oh my goodness, they definitely let you know that they're there. So they're really, really loud, but it's really fun being able to see, well, more so here, that they're pretty much in my neighborhood and backyard. Cassie, you said that you were seeing some house finches. Yes, they are also very loud, but I think their calls are a little bit more peaceful than red-tailed hawks. So that's really, really cool. Awesome. So something I wanted to touch on quickly. Oh, Andrew, you saw some eggshells and nest bits on the ground. That's awesome. That's really cool. But something I wanted to touch on really quickly is that these nests can be are really sensitive to human disruption. And there are certain species that are more sensitive to human disruption than others. Of course, like if you're sticking your hand in a nest, which you shouldn't do, all bird species are going to be disturbed by that. But some bird species, let's say if you come within 20 to 30 feet of their nest, they might not be really bothered, but other species might completely abandon their nest, from my understanding. So, ooh, the jacaranda. I always love seeing that. It's a little messy in the streets, but I always love seeing that bloom in the spring. So getting back to human disturbance, this is something that we've seen people be more adaptive and cities be more adaptive to recently, and we're so appreciative of the work that different organizations and user groups are doing to create knowledge and safe recreatable habits, so they can be safe, and then also these species can be safe when you're out enjoying nature. So for example, if you get too close to a nest, one species that I know that is fairly sensitive to people coming close or within that circumference around their nest is the golden eagle. So the golden eagle is not the bald eagle. They are spread out around North America, but their populations, from my understanding, are declining, especially within our county. There are very few remaining. And an example of that is that there have been past nests that have been near climbing routes. So if you know someone who's a rock climber or a scrambler or a boulderer, it's super fun, great recreatable activity, but it can definitely disrupt these nests that are within that area. And I believe it was the city of Poway that closed down a climbing route to protect a potential nesting site. So that was a really awesome reaction from the city. And then also I know that user group has been continually mindful in how they're recreating, because sometimes these nests are not very obvious. So once you stumble upon them, it's like, oh geez. So we're super appreciative of people adapting in how they interact within these natural spaces. And then another thing is hiking. Sometimes people will unfortunately go off trail, and when you go off trail, you're sometimes likely to stumble upon a nest, and not all nests are in canopies. So that's something to think about as well. And the other thing that I wanted to touch on is the special adaptations. Again, we already slightly mentioned this in the beginning. It's talking about these special adaptations that these birds have within our watershed specifically. Len, you mentioned that the ospreys by the Del Mar Fairgrounds. This is so cool. So ospreys are a type of raptor that we have within the county and within our watershed, and they'll return to the same nesting site year after year after year. And there's a nesting site that we have right next to the Del Mar Fairgrounds, and it's really cool because they'll stack their nest from years past. Like it's like really tall, and quite obvious. And it's amazing because these ospreys will go ahead and dive down into and around the lagoon to obviously hunt for fish and then return it to their chicks. It's so fun. Oh, Cassie, that's so great to hear that there's another pair of ospreys down at Tijuana. That's amazing. But to answer your question, I haven't been down toward Del Mar sites because the trails are closed. But I have spent some time up and around the Escondido and Ramona area, checking out the semi-eastern parts of our watershed. So hopefully, when it's safe to reopen the trails, we'll get a really good glimpse of the ospreys. So, but I know the rangers out there will have definitely been keeping up with. That's my dog whining in the background. I apologize. So that being said, there are two things that a lot of the birds have had to adapt to within our watershed specifically. Around the globe, obviously, the climate is changing, and as I said, they're an indicator species, so they can really tell and respond quickly to these apparently minute changes that we might not notice right off the bat. Another really, really big significant thing regionally specific to our watershed is the dams in our watershed. We have two dams, Lake Sutherland and Lake Hodges. Lake Sutherland is in the eastern part of our watershed up near Ramona, and Lake Hodges is in the Escondido bordering Rancho Bernardo area. So have you guys ever been to Lake Hodges before? I'm really curious because that's definitely one of my favorite sites that I go to, and it was a favorite site of mine that I would go to even before I started working with the Conservancy. So I feel really lucky on that end. So really interesting part about Lake Hodges is that it is classified as a globally important bird area by the National Audubon Society and the American Bird Conservancy, which is really, really awesome that this, on the entire globe, this seemingly little part of San Diego and this part of our watershed is such a significant area for the birds. So it's really amazing, and a special shout out to Palomar Audubon. I think it was in the mid-90s or early 2000s, I can't remember. I'll have to check my history. But they petitioned to have Lake Hodges recognized as this important area. So it's really amazing, and usually within a year, there's documented of over 200 species, whether they are migrating through or they're living in the surrounding area of Lake Hodges. So that's amazing, and again is an indicator of that biodiversity that we were talking about. So just really lucky that we were able to have that treasure, and thankful for the work that so many organizations and people and user groups have put into that area to make it what it is today, and then keep it there for future generations. So that's always something I love to mention, is that it's this really amazing piece of habitat that we have right here. And something really important to note about the Lake Hodges area is that there's a really dense concentration of coastal sage scrub plants. And if you're not familiar with what coastal sage scrub is, it's a plant community that is largely disappearing due to development, and there's not much of it left. A lot of bird species depend on that habitat plant community, and their populations have declined as a result. So I apologize for fidgeting. I just want to make sure I'm not covering the speaker on the iPad. So that being said, I'm hoping we can go ahead and move to a couple. We'll have to readjust a little bit here for a second to make it work. But I wanted to show you guys, it would be much easier if it was on my iPad, but of course it's not. So we're making it work, and I'm using my computer over here. So I'm gonna play this call, and I want to know if you guys are familiar with it. So go ahead and give it a listen, and make sure, if you could just let me know that you heard it also, that would be really great. Okay. So that is a really awesome bird call, and one of the first bird calls that I ever learned. I am by no means an expert birder, but again, it's one of my favorite hobbies that I get to do. Oh yeah, you guys heard it. Amazing. Cassie, you got it. Gold star. It's a wren-tit. So this is a really prolific bird species that's found around our county and especially within our watershed, and it is called a wren-tit. And most people are familiar with that call, and maybe they don't know exactly what the bird is or remember what it is, but definitely have heard it. I've heard it illustrated as a ping pong ball. So if you like drop a ping pong ball goes doo, 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 doo. So it's really fun. I always like listening to that call. And another one, we were talking about how these birds have different adaptations, especially in their beaks and their body size and the shape of their head, in order to really hunt their prey or to break open seeds. So one really, really interesting bird that I always like to highlight is the California gnatcatcher. If you guys have never heard of the California gnatcatcher, it is a really, for lack of a better word, really cute bird. I'm hoping I can show you guys a picture in a second. But they are listed as an endangered species, and that's again because most of their habitat is that coastal sage scrub, which has disappeared over the years. So let's go ahead and listen to that call. And again, if you guys could let me know that you heard it, that would be great. Sometimes there's a little bit of a buffer. Awesome. So I'm glad you guys were able to hear that. And Len, yes. So one of our partners, San Diego Canyonlands, they're an awesome organization. Their logo is the California gnatcatcher. And I don't know if this is specifically why they chose it, but I don't think it's coincidental that California gnatcatchers, the discovery or observation of their species existing within certain areas can get development halted, either in the short term or for the long term. So if anyone's familiar with Gonzales Canyon, in like the border of Del Mar entering into San Diego, City of San Diego manages that canyon, and that canyon was actually preserved in part for the California gnatcatcher. So I always like to, Cassie, yeah, it does sound like a kazoo. I always like to mention the gnatcatcher because I think it sounds a little bit like a kitten mewing. That's what I like to mention to kiddos when we're out in the field together. So I won't play the whole bird call, but listen again and hopefully you guys will understand what I mean by that. And I listen to all my bird calls on allaboutbirds.org. It's really fun. It's something to do. So if you guys are wondering, that's where I get most of my bird calls. And another one that I wanted to highlight, and then maybe we can get into a few pictures before we end for this evening. And again, I really appreciate you guys' flexibility with all the technology stuff, but we're in it together. So something that I learned again when I was in college that I thought was super interesting is, you see these movies, these majestic bald eagles that are just like screeching over the land, and like they have this really prolific, profound call, and then I didn't even realize, but most particularly older movies and some newer ones, they dub over a red-tailed hawk call over bald eagles, because bald eagles actually don't have very, I don't want to say impressive because that sounds insulting, but they don't have very pronounced calls. That's a much better way of saying it. But let's go ahead. This one's going to be loud. I'm going to turn down the volume on my computer when I play the call. So this is your 3-second warning before I play the call. You might want to turn down your volume. Again, I tried to adjust, but 3-second warning. 1, 2, 3. I don't want you guys to be too surprised. Okay. So that's one version of the call. Let's listen to another one. Again, still going to be a little loud. So this one's really common to dub over a bald eagle. And then just for reference, I'm going to play a bald eagle's call. There's a couple different kinds, of course, but I just think that's so interesting because, you know, I grew up watching these movies with bald eagles, and that's not even their call that I'm used to hearing. But the way that the bald eagle's call is described is a series of high-pitched whistling or piping notes. So that was always really fun. So I'm gonna go ahead. Let's see if there's any. Nope, there's no more calls that I want to mention. And I'm gonna close out. Hopefully, I'll be able to show you guys a few quick pictures, and I won't spend too much time on this. All right, gonna get again close and personal to my face. All right, so this is my computer, and this is a long-billed curlew, and I wanted to include this picture of this bird. It usually exists in the shoreline areas, and it has this, you know, obviously very long curled beak in order to dig through the sand and be able to eat different you know, smaller crabs and different species like that. So it's, again, has that special adaptation. If you drop this bird you know, up in the mountains, then it would not be able to survive, and it wouldn't be adapted to that area. This one is called the coastal cactus wren. I really love the coastal cactus wren. We've done some restoration projects in collaboration with the San Diego Zoo because their habitat depends on the prickly pear cactus and for their nesting, and they unfortunately that plant species has declined, again mostly due to development, but they're really interesting, and they build their nests within the cactus stand itself, which is really impressive. Let's see. This one is always so funny to me. This is our beautiful California quail. I love seeing these little guys run around. I was helping do some restoration work at one of our sites last week, and we saw a couple just, you know, skitting about. It was adorable, and it's really interesting, that little piece that hangs off the front of their head. That's actually a combination of feathers. I never knew what that was, and it makes sense that it's feathers, but I always thought it was interesting to have that ornamental feather on their head. This is another one of my favorite species, and I apologize for the quality, but it is the western grebe. So there are different subspecies of grebes, and you will very often see these at Lake Hodges, and they're amazing. They're amazing birds, and they place their chicks on their back as they get older, so it's really sweet. And they do this really amazing, interesting mating dance. Their courtship, where they'll bob their heads, they'll sometimes intertwine their heads and necks, and then they'll race across the water. So it's really interesting, something that I've had the pleasure of and the privilege of watching before, like a little natural phenomenon. It's awesome. This is our wonderful little California gnatcatcher. I think it looks like an angry tennis ball, and kids, when we do birding programs, absolutely love the gnatcatcher. They just think it looks like the silliest bird, but they're really interesting bird species. So we definitely appreciate their place in our watershed and habitats. This is what I mentioned earlier when we were talking about nesting season and human disruption of nests. This is a golden eagle. So they're, again, I say this about almost every bird, but really interesting. I would encourage you guys to go ahead and learn about them a little bit more. Their colors are just breathtaking and their behaviors as well. So that's that red-tailed hawk. You can see again that it has that very bright red tail, and it's very easy to spot from the sky. Even if you're not good at identifying birds or you don't have binoculars, you can definitely do that. And what we have here is our beautiful little wren tit, the one that we were discussing, where it makes that little ping pong ball call, and it has that really sharp uptick of a tail, and it's quite long. Ooh, this is the one that I would really like you guys to see. Okay, that readjusted barely. But this is an egret. So this is in the Conservancy's logo. So this is a really prolific species that we see. There's great egrets, snowy egrets, but this is in our logo, our wonderful egret, who we appreciate so much. So with that, that is what I have for you guys. I don't want to keep you too long. I'd be happy to give you guys some advice on how to get started in birding. It's really simple. You don't really need anything other than a pen and a pencil, or pen and paper, or pencil and paper. So I'd love to give you guys some tips on that. So if you're interested, go ahead and email me. It's Anna, ANA, at sdrvc.org, and I'll go ahead and send you some really quick links. I have super kid-friendly, a little birding packet that can, easily be converted onto scrap paper. And this is what we traditionally use in a more extensive way for some of our educational programs. So we of course are tracking these birds because they're indicator species. It's a part of our citizen science program, like when we did the wildlife camera traps. So this is a part of what we do in order to make sure that we're being, in tune and in touch with our habitat, because these are really the species that are going to tell you possibly sooner rather than later when something is awry or maybe not working the best of its ability. So with that being said, again, thank you so much for your guys' flexibility with all the technology stuff. Next week I will be back on my computer and I'll have it all sorted out, but I appreciate you being here. Next week we're going to talk about, we always mention like watersheds and what they are and all that stuff. Len, thank you so much for writing in my email. I really appreciate it. So we always like just mention watersheds in passing, but I don't think we've ever mentioned or done a mini lesson on that. So we're going to talk about watersheds and water quality and the importance of that. And something that I really hope you guys are able to check out, like this is my favorite resource that I think I found during my 3 years with the Conservancy. We're going to be attaching links to photos, an online album that's in the Library of Congress. And this is old photos of Lake Hodges from the early 1900s. And it's wild. Like, we're going to talk about it next week, and I'm so excited to learn more about it. So thank you for giving me that opportunity, and I really appreciate you guys tuning in as well. Go ahead and share this with other people. We hope more people are able to tune in. We hope you're doing well and that you're safe, and that we're weathering this together. So again, my name is Anna. I work for the San Dieguito River Valley Conservancy, and I hope that you all have a wonderful evening, and I will see you next week.